Philippians is a book that is all about how the gospel changes everything, how it changes everything about us. It changes us inwardly. It changes our drive, our focus, our perspective. And it not only just, it's not just something that when we come to know Jesus Christ and we trust in the work that He did and we trust in the gospel, it's not just there for our salvation. It is also there to divinely enable us to live. So the gospel is something that is carried on in our lives. The work of Jesus is not just this one thing that we trust in Him and then we're done. It's something that carries through our life. It's something that is lived out in our life. It's something that affects our life and changes everything about us. And so that's what the book is about. And that's what Paul has been talking about. And last week we looked at just what the gospel looks like in our everyday life. And if you were here last week, I gave this analogy from the very beginning. You know, we live in a world today where you don't have to be an expert to fix or work on just about anything in your life. It's funny. How many of you have ever tried to change your iPad or iPhone screen? Has anybody done that? Several people have. I would never even attempt it, but believe it or not, you can go right now on Amazon, buy the screen. If your phone's cracked, you can buy the screen for your phone, and they'll give you instructions. And then there's videos. I know buddies of mine they only do their phones. They never take them in when they get broken. You know, I do this with other things around the house. We look at a manual, you read the instructions, you look at IKEA. You buy a piece of furniture, you look at the instructions, and then what do? You throw them away. Thanks, Dad. No, you don't throw them away. You go to YouTube, right? And you look at the video and you see how this guy puts them together. You're working on your faucet at home. You look at the instructions. You go to YouTube. You look at how they put it together. Well, last week we looked at the manual. And what does it look like in our everyday life? And we looked at how God has designed the gospel in our lives, that we are to work out our salvation, that we're to live for Him every day. And then working out our salvation and working and being sanctified by Him, He works in and through us on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, as we are surrendered, as Paul said, in obedience to Him. And today we're going to look at the YouTube. We're going to look at examples. We're going to see what it looks like. And Paul gives us 3 different examples to follow as we go through this. So grab your Bible, turn to chapter 2, and that's where we're going to start. I introduced this whole thing this whole section out of a quote from C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said this. He said, "True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less." And this came out of the text where we just went through, where Jesus empties Himself. He sets aside His ability as God to manifest Himself publicly. He sets that all aside, taking on the form of a bondservant, and He gives us this beautiful example of a selfless life. So now we're going to see through Paul, through Timothy, through another gentleman named Epaphroditus, what does selflessness look like? So the question that we're going to ask here is, what are some qualities of selfless people? Now the great thing about this is we do this all the time in our lives. You and I are constantly evaluating people, especially people that we admire, and we're looking for their qualities. We're looking for things about them that we want to either emulate or the things that will reinforce the things we love about them, the reasons why we love them. And so what we're going to see today is we're going to pull out 6 different things that we see in these 3 men's lives that re-emphasize the selfless gospel mission life to us. All right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at examples from Paul's life. Paul gives us the first example is what we would say is contagious joy. Contagious joy. Have you ever met someone, a friend or anybody who is just full of joy? Like, when you get around them, they just made you happier. I know I have people in my life like that. Maybe you have a coworker or a relative or a friend or somebody you grew up with. I used to work at Liberty Christian School years ago. I was a youth pastor there and a coach. And there was this guy named Sean. And Sean would come around, and he was an assistant and a part-time guy. And he was always in and out. And whenever he came in the room, you just wanted to smile. You just got excited. He had a joy about him that he lived out, and that joy was contagious. It was passed on. Did you know that? Kind of like my sickness. If you come near me, you could either get filled with joy or you could get filled with the rotavirus. One of the two. All right? All right? Well, and what's interesting is in 2008, the British Medical Journal did a study, a 20-year study that concluded in 2008. Over 5,000 people were studied. And they studied the happiness and joy levels of these people and how happiness and joy was transmitted. And over that 20 years, they found that there's a 3 degrees of separation for joy and happiness. Did you know that? That you can transmit to other people joy and happiness. Not only can you transmit it to other people, but let's look at it this way. Your friends can transmit joy to you. Your friend's friend can transmit joy to you. And your friend's friend's friend can transmit joy to you. Isn't that weird? I mean, you'd think, yeah, with a pathogen, that makes sense. So maybe we should just think of joy as a pathogen. It's just a disease that we are contagiously trying to spread. Look at the text. Look at what he says. Now, but even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering. Now stop right there. He's talking about himself here. He just got through explaining what it looks like to us to live out the gospel. Living it out in obedience to the Lord and surrender to the Lord, and what happens to us as a result of surrendering our life to the Lord and living in obedience to Him. And now he's going to say, but even if he's going to give us an example, and being poured out like a drink offering. What you're going to see here in this little text with Paul is he's going to make a lot of references that sound like worship. The idea of a drink offering is it was a sacrificial offering. It was something that the Jews did in service, in pouring out. It was like a symbol to the Lord. We do a lot of symbolic things in Christianity. This was a symbolic gesture of worship and sacrifice to the Lord. You ever heard of pilots in the military? You've probably seen this on movies and stuff, but pilots in the military had this tradition that during wartime, when one of their friends would get killed or shot down, they would line up and they would all have a toast to this man. They would all drink a toast, and they would take his glass that he would have been there to drink, and they pour it out as a symbol. And you look at what he says. He says, even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and the service of your faith. Stop right there. The word sacrifice you see here is the same word that we find in Romans 12:1, where Paul tells the church at Rome that we are to live, our bodies are living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God as an act of worship. So he says, even if I am being poured out as a sacrifice and service, the word service here is a ceremonial word. It's where we get the word liturgy from. It's liturgia is the word in Greek. And it's literally, I'm being poured out as a sacrifice or as a ceremony or a liturgy. You know what a liturgy is? It's the forms of worship that we adopt within our church. You ever been to a church where they had responsive readings? I remember growing up in a Baptist church, they had in the back of the hymnal. The pastor would read something, and then the congregation would read something, and then the pastor would read something, and the congregation would read something. You ever been a part of a Catholic church when the priest said he would say something, and then everybody would stand and say something back? He says, even if these are all liturgical aspects of worship that we have adopted. And he says, even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering, or a sacrifice of worship, or this liturgical act, all that he's seeing here is him going and to the very end, to his death, is seen as an act of worship. Watch what he says about it, though. He says, I rejoice and share my joy with you. Stop. Even if all this is going on, even if I'm breathing my last and God is using me only as an act of worship for Him, I'm going to rejoice and I'm going to share it with you. And look what he asked for in return. You too, I urge you, rejoice in the same way and share your joy with me. You know, growing up, if you had a bad day, If you were having a bad time at home, who did you want to see? You wanted to see your friends, right? You wanted to be close to the people that loved you, right? If you came home from school as a young kid and you were bullied or hurt or scuffed knee or something happened, who did you want to see? You wanted to see the person or the people who loved you, who you knew would care for you. You wanted to see mama. You wanted to see daddy. You wanted to see your friends. You wanted somebody to come alongside you and give you joy. And he's explaining that in the same fashion, that this is the response. This is from the YouTube channel. Our job is to live contagiously. How many Christians do you know today that are contagiously filled with joy? I mean, you might be able to name one or two. You might be able to name a couple. But wouldn't that be, what do you think would happen if all the church, contagiously filled with joy, gave it away on a daily basis? You know what would be said about us? Something is wrong, right? Because that's not normal. You're right, it's not normal. And it's not supposed to be normal. It's supposed to be evidence of something that's happening in us. And that we don't let the darkness of this age take that away from us. So that's Paul. He gives us one example from his life, and then he moves on. Now we're going to see an example from Timothy's life. Timothy, look at the text. Timothy, the first thing you're going to see here is Timothy has a genuine concern for others. A genuine concern for others. Look at verse 19. He says, "But I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, so that I also may be encouraged when I learn of your condition." Keep watching. "For I have no one else of kindred spirit who will genuinely be concerned for your welfare, for they all seek after their own interest, not those of Jesus Christ." Stop right there for just a second. The thing you see here is that he is genuinely concerned for others. Many of us know who Nelson Mandela was. Many of us know his story of his life. Here's a man who fought against the governmental system, the racial system of apartheid, the racist system of apartheid that basically was a South African, set up in the South African government by the white governmental power, the minority power, to control the black population, the majority black population. And so they would, in order to stay in power, they created racist laws that governed the black minorities, or the black majority, excuse me. Well, Nelson Mandela, he was a part of what's known as the African National Congress, the ANC party. And he did all kinds of things. He thought this was wrong. He thought it was immoral. And so he fought against it. Well, he went to jail for 27 years, 1962 to the late 80s. And during that time period, or actually 1990, and during that time period, he won all kinds of awards, and ultimately, the movement that he was a part of it came to its heyday. And they let him out of jail. And him and the president of South Africa, in order to avoid race wars, they settled on a new system of government that abolished apartheid. Now, here's why I'm telling you this story. Because in the wake of that abolition of apartheid, here they set up a new government that elects Nelson Mandela as president. And so now you have this majority black community who has elected a black president who sets up an entirely new government. And what do you think the response would have been? He would have come in and completely punished the white minority. He would have come in and taken over and reestablished laws and with revenge ruled, right? Because that's what we do. But he won the Nobel Prize for this because it's not what he did. In setting up the new government, he came in and he loved them. He didn't bring retribution. He had grace. And he had a genuine concern, not just for his own, but for everyone. And you saw this in the wake of his presidency, how he led and how he ruled. He did not want them to be punished. As a matter of fact, his own African Nationalist Congress party turned against him because They thought, well, you're just placating to the white people who did this in the first place. He was like, no, you don't understand. We're supposed to bring unity. Have you ever saw the movie Invictus? Invictus was a movie made about this whole struggle of trying to bring unity between two opposing parties. And I tell you this story because you see Timothy showed something, and Nelson Mandela showed something that is very characteristic of Christian. This concept of being genuinely, authentically concerned for another person. And not just in the sense of for those who are like us, but for somebody else who is absolutely against us. Look back at your text. He says, for I have no one else of kindred spirit. The word kindred spirit here is the phrase equal soul. In other words, there's no one like me that has this, that I know, that has the same love for you. That genuine concern for your welfare. Nelson Mandela once said this. He said that a fundamental concern for all others in our individual and community lives would go a long way in making the world the better place we so passionately dreamt of. And there's this concept within Christianity, this example that if we want to every day live out the gospel, we have to begin this process of thinking others is greater than ourselves, laying aside self, and being genuinely concerned for someone else. Let's keep looking. Timothy gives us a second example. Look in your text, verse 22. He said, but you know of his proven worth. This is his character. Timothy was with Paul in Acts 16. In Acts 16, when Paul establishes the church, Timothy was there, and Paul's telling them, you know this guy. You know who he is, how genuinely he is concerned for you. You know his character. That he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child serving his father. Stop right there. The next thing you see as an example, as the YouTube channel continues to play, is you see a guy who's loyal to the gospel mission. Now I want you to see something in the text. Notice what he says. That he served with me, verse 22, that he served with me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child serving his father. You can't infer here that he is loyal specific to Paul. But more importantly, is where Paul is now, where Timothy is now. What Timothy does after Paul is dead in his continuance of the gospel. He is about the gospel mission. He is loyal to the gospel mission. Have you ever seen or heard this term, being loyal to a fault? You ever heard that term? The term loyal to a fault comes into play when people are loyal to an individual or to a system or to something that ultimately is broken, that has a fault, that has a problem. I don't know about you, but I know people who have, and I've struggled with this myself, who have been loyal to other people. My friends, I've been loyal. I can remember this when I was a youth, that I would be loyal to my friends, and as my parents were trying to explain to me what was really going on and how I needed to break some of my loyal ties with them in order to have a pure life, a life that was dedicated and set apart unto God and without sin, I just couldn't get it because I was loyal to a fault. But the loyalty that he's calling us to here is not to a broken system or to a broken individual, but notice it's to the gospel. And he gives us the example as a child to a father, right? There's nothing more loyal than a child to a parent or a child to a father, right? Do you remember when you were a kid? Somebody was messing with you, all right? What did you say? I'm going to go get my dad. And that other kid would say, well, I'm going to go get my dad. And then what did you say? My dad can beat up your dad. Right? That's what you said. My dad can take your dad. Oh, yeah? And we played Don King, and then we called our dads. Hey, Dad, can you come out to the parking lot? Hey, yeah, this guy's dad said something bad about you. And then the other kid, yeah, this guy's dad called you a name. What? And then, and there's a brawl. Did y'all ever do that? No? No, I didn't either. But we're so loyal that we think our fathers could do anything. And we would have stood behind them and watched them get beat up in the process. We would have gone to the ground for them. We would have died for them. That's how deep our loyalty as a child went. And even today, the term blood is thicker than water is about loyalty. And as a church, our example, if we're living out the gospel, if we're living out the grace of God, we're living out a selfless life, there's this loyalty that we have to begin to give our allegiance, our support to this thing. Keep looking at the text. We're going to change people now. We've looked at Paul. We looked at Timothy. Let's look at Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus is a very, he's not a very well-known guy. Paul writes extensively about him right here. He's mentioned in the Bible. His name means charming, and we don't have a lot of information about him, but this section makes clear about some really amazing things about this guy, and I want to point him out. The first thing that we see as an example that he gives is Paul gives us three things about him in this one verse. He calls him a brother, a worker, and a soldier. Look at the text. Verse 25. He says, "But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus." So he goes through talking about himself. He goes through talking about Timothy, and he says, "I'm going to send Timothy to you. I'm going to send him to you, and he's going to report back to me your condition." And in the process, but I thought, more importantly, I need to send this guy. Now, Epaphroditus, he was, for what most theologians believe, the gift carrier. Remember, Philippians is a book written about, it's like a thank you letter written about a gift. If you go back to chapter 1, he's thanking and praying for and blessed by the gifts that were given by the Philippian church to him while he's in prison. And we believe that Epaphroditus is the messenger, because he talks about him being the messenger, and the minister to Paul from the church at Philippi. All right? Look at the text. He says, "I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother." In other words, calling him a brother is that he shares in my spiritual life. All right? As I call you brothers and sisters, we share in one another's spiritual lives. All right? There's an intimacy because of who we are in Jesus. He's my brother, and look, he calls him my fellow worker. In other words, he also is sharing in Paul's labor. You know, if somebody, have you ever known somebody who was like a cabinet member to a politician, or to somebody who was very powerful? I have a student of mine who's a cabinet member for, an assistant to the governor of Arkansas. And I saw him at a Walmart, or at a Academy Sports this last fall, and we were talking, and I was finding out what he was doing. I was like, "Whoa, really? You work with that guy?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so we started talking about it. But him being connected with this guy's work made him special to me. Not that I was thinking he was, something he wasn't. He was just some stupid little kid that I taught in junior high. And here he is all grown up as an adult. Now he's just a stupid adult. No, I'm just kidding. But it made him special because now he is associated with this other guy's work. Whenever you meet somebody who is close friends or who works alongside somebody who you admire, you instantly attach something to that. This guy co-labors with them. There's something about him. And he calls him his fellow soldier. In other words, he shares in the danger. He doesn't just share in the work and share in the brotherhood. He shares in the danger. Something about this guy is that he is what we would say is in full partnership with Paul and the work that Paul is doing. Keep looking back at your text. "Who is also your messenger." This is where we get him to my needs. The care package. "And minister to my needs." Let me stop real quick. Paul brings back up this word. The word minister here is to, as a priest would administer the sacrifice and the offerings and the work of the temple. This is how Paul sees this guy. He uses the same word that he used for service, liturgia. He uses liturgos, which is this idea of the priest offering the ceremony. So he is a minister to me and to my needs. Look at what else he does. Emotionally, he is connected to his spiritual family. Look at the next set of text. Verse 26, because he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. So he's sending him because of two things. He's dying to see you. Have you ever been emotionally connected to somebody who has been far away from you? You ever move away from some friends or had a friend move away and you just missed them? You long to see them? That's one thing, right? My buddy up in Colorado, man, I'd love to go see him. Now, this goes a little deeper than just I want to go see you. This is an emotional connection to his spiritual family. You ever gone from left one church and had to go to another church? Maybe you moved out of town. Maybe you went from one city to the next and you joined a new church and you missed your brothers and sisters who you served alongside. I would say this goes more kindred to a soldier in battle who, after the war is over, longs for his brothers in arms. That's what this is. This deep emotional connection to something else and to someone else. Give you a quick quote here. D.L. Moody used to say this. He used to say, all things are possible. Faith makes all things possible, but love makes them easy. And I think this is important in the work that we see. Epaphroditus can do the work that he was called to do because of his love, not only for Paul, but his love for those who sent him and those who are back behind him. Now look what happens to him. Something happens in the midst of this. Look at your text in verse 27. Before that he says he's distressed because you heard he was sick. And now look at what he talks about. For indeed he was sick to the point of death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, so that I would not have sorrow upon sorrow. See, there's this deep connection between Paul and Epaphroditus that man, I don't want this guy to die. You know, I'm up here right now starting to sweat because I'm sick and I'm cold. That's true, I am. I was like, wow, I read that text and I'm starting to sweat. Now there's this thing when you get sick, as you're feeling bad, you, once again, I don't know about you, but the emotional centers of my brain get triggered. I long for my friends. I long for comfort. I long to be around the people I love. I don't ever believe I've ever been sick to the point of death. But don't you know that when you're laying on a deathbed and the next breath could be your last breath, that he had to have a lot of thoughts going through his head. Man, I really do wish I could go back and see my family and my friends. I wish I had one more time to talk to them. One more chance to play cards with so-and-so or to have a drink with my buddy or to tell this family how much they meant to me and I cared for them. He's longing to see them, but something happens. God spares his life, and so now all those things that he said on his deathbed, he now gets a chance to do. If you were on your deathbed and you could, what do you imagine you would say? What do you imagine you would be longing for? If this was the end of your life and you knew that, man, you're about to pass from this world to the next, are there any things that you wish you could go back, or any people you wish you could go and say and talk to? You know, research has shown that most people don't ever, when on their deathbed, talk about how much money they had or how much success they had. They never talk about that stuff. They always say names, people, relationships. I realize that God has made us all a little different. That some of us are more data people things. Some of us are more data people, I'm saying this wrong. Some of us are people who like data. Some of us are people who like things, and some of us are people who like people. I realize that. You can take any personality test and they'll almost at some point break you up into those three categories. But regardless of how you fall on that scale, He's built us all to live relationally. And don't you know that when you die, at the end of your life, you're not going to be thinking about your cash flow. You're not going to be thinking about the trip that you had planned for the Bahamas or the new truck that you had just bought. You're going to be thinking about faces and names and people. That emotional connection you have. And that's where he's at right now, Epaphroditus. And watch what he says. God had mercy on him, not only him, but to me. He kept me from having sorrow upon sorrow, verse 28. Therefore I sent him all the more eagerly. Don't you know Paul's sitting here holding his hand, buddy, it's going to be okay, man. You're going to hang through this. You're going to get through this. It's all right. Dabbing his forehead, getting the sweat off of him, cleaning up after him. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Hearing him talk. Don't you know he was more eager to send him? I sat there with him. He longed for you. Enough to put it in the Bible. You know? He longed for you. So that when you see him again, you may rejoice. And I may be less concerned about you. I'm not going to be concerned that you're going to lose a friend, and I don't have to worry about you because I'm going to send a guy who is amazing. Look at the last thing I want us to see. The last example, the last piece of the YouTube video that we get to watch in Epaphroditus' life is that he is willing to risk it all. He's willing to risk it all. Do you know that when Epaphroditus was sent to Paul, Epaphroditus wasn't sent to Paul to, hey buddy, here's a letter, I got to go. That's not how this worked back then. When he came with the church, he had left his job, he had left his service back at Philippi, and he came with an open-ended service. I'm here to help. What do you need? I'm not here for a week, I'm not here for 10 days. We as Americans run on a clock. This wasn't how this was. He was sent with cash, he was sent with offering and a care package, but he wasn't sent on a time frame. He left to go to Paul, to serve Paul, to minister to Paul. All right? And in the process, he knew that he may never see those people again. Look at what he says. I want you to receive him then in the Lord with all joy. Notice what he says. Hold men like him in high regard. So there's this respect that he now, because of his act of service, he should now receive. What happens when you meet a missionary that you serve and they come back? How do you treat them? I don't know about you, but I usually take them out to dinner. I invite them to stay at my house. I hold missionaries usually in high regard because they have given up something to go do something amazing. And I get that from this text right here. Ministers of the gospel who have given up it all. They've given up, watch what he says to give it up, verse 30. Because he came close to death for the work of Christ. He didn't come close to death because he was out working in the field or he was working on a car or he was out doing something. No, he came close to death because of the gospel. Because he was trying to do something for the sake of Christ. Because he came close to death for the work of Christ, risking his life. Notice this, to complete what was deficient in your service to me. So, we actually, whether it's a missionary or somebody else, you know these people. You probably have seen people like this. I grew up with a guy, he was a grandfather of one of my best friends. His name was Carl Ware. Remember Carl? Carl was so cool. He died a few years back. Carl was a neat man. We didn't always see eye to eye, but he was a good dude. Carl actually, I didn't know anything about him other than just being my buddy's grandfather. But Carl served in World War II. And I found this out because the family, his family had this shadow box that they had made. And the shadow box had his uniform in it. I think it had a gun in it. It had like the gun he carried. It had all these newspaper clippings and stuff. And it had in it all these medals, but one medal specifically had a Purple Heart medal. And I can remember when my buddy got this, it was that they would do with the shadow boxes, they would pass it around to all the different families, and everybody would get it for like a year. And all the grandkids got to have it, and it would be placed in the grandkids' room honoring the granddad. All right? It's pretty cool. Well, I remember my buddy got it, and I was like reading the newspaper clipping and just and all the different things, and him receiving his medals and the pictures and everything. And in the shadow box was this wallet. And the wallet had a hole in it. It had been ripped almost in half. And I'm like, why is this nasty old ripped in half wallet in the thing? And then there was pictures and stuff and different cards and things that were ripped in half. And my buddy Sean starts telling me the story of his grandfather. And he says, hey, he said, yeah, my granddad was shot in the chest in France. I was like, what? He's like, yeah. And the bullet, sniper bullet, entered, he had his wallet in his pocket, and it entered through the wallet and then went into him, and the wallet saved his life. Well, when I heard that story, I mean, I had spent so much time at Carl's house. He had this great workshop in his garage, and he kept it full of sodas and stuff for me and Sean and all of Sean's friends. We would just go in there, and he'd say, you guys go get your Coke, and we'd go get a Coke, and he would make us toy wooden guns. He did all this kind of stuff with wood. He made a fort for us, and he was just always the nicest guy, would just do anything for you. And I just thought of him as just some dude's granddad. But when I found that out, I couldn't look at Carl the same anymore. I had to look at him different. It's almost like he's mythical now. Here's just this guy. Hey, here's a Coke, buddy. Here, come on. Let's get in the Jeep. Let's go for a ride. And now he's this thing. What changed? What changed is I saw the truth about him. Here's a guy who was willing to lay down his life for something greater. And it changed me. Don't you know that if all of the Christians of the world stepped up and began to do these 6 things, living joy contagiously, being genuinely concerned for others, emotionally connected to our spiritual family, on, and risking to the point of being willing to risk our life for the gospel, for the mission, for the cause of Jesus Christ, I guarantee you, we would no longer just be seen as something to be ignored or something to be just, those are just the crazy Christians. But those who are called by God would see us, and they would be drawn to us because of the life we live. Wouldn't you love to see these guys wouldn't you love to see that in a movie, on a YouTube video? Because now that we've seen it in the Bible, you and I have this opportunity. Just like you read the manual, you watch the video, then what do? You go and do it, right? Let's go and do it.